She's not blood, but she's our walking wallet. The line hit the table like a dropped fork. Laughter burst around me, sharp, bright, a little cruel. I kept my smile steady and adjusted my hospital jacket on the back of the chair. I'd come straight from a 12-hour shift. The jacket still smelled like antiseptic. Everyone else smelled like money. The restaurant glowed. Marble floors, gold light, soft jazz. My mother's birthday cake waited on a mirrored cart, glittering with sugar. My family filled the long table in designer outfits that flashed when they moved. Madison lifted her wrist for a photo, and the diamonds fought the chandelier. I slid my hands under the table and rubbed the crease where my watch had dug into my wrist all day. My father stood with a flute of champagne. "To Madison," he said, loud enough for the next table to hear, "our brilliant girl." Glasses rose, cameras clicked. Madison blew a kiss down the table, then leaned toward me. "Try to look happy," she said. "It's a party." "I'm happy," I said. It sounded thin. They talked about Paris, about a private gallery that only opened for the right people, about a villa on the Amalfi Coast. Plates landed, silver covers lifted, butter melted on steaks. My mother dabbed her lipstick and laughed as if the room belonged to her. Not one person asked about my shift. Not one asked why the jacket was still there. When I laughed at a joke I didn't catch, Madison's smile tightened. "Paris is pricey," she said, keeping her voice light. "You probably know that, from Instagram." I sipped water. The glass tapped against my teeth. My father rapped his fork against his glass. "One more," he said, basking, "to Madison's new brand." 200,000 followers, a real star. He turned his head, like he'd practiced it. "And to Bella," he added, "who may not be a star, but she always pays on time." They laughed again. My mother laughed the loudest, her hand on my father's sleeve like she'd earned the punchline. A waiter refilled my glass and didn't meet my eyes. Heat ran up my neck. I rolled my shoulders back and held the smile like a tray I didn't want to drop. Dinner stretched. I cut food into small pieces and pushed them around. Madison. The folder stopped against my plate. I blinked at it. I could still feel the weight of the last patient's hand in mine, the old man who didn't want to sleep because he was afraid he wouldn't wake up. I reached for my wallet. My fingers stuck to each other. My palms had gone damp. "How much is it?" I asked. "4.5, he said, cheerful, plus tip." Madison leaned in, perfume sweet and heavy. "You've got this," she whispered. "Hospitals pay well, and Mom loves gifts." I nodded. I pulled out my card. The waiter hovered with the handheld machine. I handed him the card and wiped my thumb on my napkin. The room hummed. Forks chimed. Someone at a nearby table sang the first notes of Happy Birthday to a stranger. My jaw ached from clenching. The machine beeped. The waiter frowned. He tried again. Beep. He swallowed and looked at me. "I'm sorry," he said softly. "It isn't going through." My father chuckled. "Try again," he said, waving his hand. "She's good for it." Madison tapped the table with her nail. "Maybe there's a limit," she sing-songed, "for people like—" "Run it," I said to the waiter. My voice came out steady. I didn't know how. He ran it. Beep. He looked at me with pity he tried to hide. A couple at the next table glanced over. My mother didn't. She was busy approving a photo of her cake. My father sighed as if this were tiresome. "The bank," he said, amused. "They're so dramatic." I reached into my bag for another card. My hands shook. The napkin fell to the floor. The waiter bent to pick it up, and I whispered, "Thank you," because that was the only thing that felt decent. Madison's voice brushed my ear. "Don't be embarrassed," she said. "Mom likes people who sacrifice." I slid the second card. The machine thought about it, beeped, and spat it back. The sound felt louder this time. The people who'd been glancing fully turned. Their eyes stuck. My throat tightened like a fist had closed around it. "I can call the bank," I told the waiter, already pulling out my phone. "There's enough." I wasn't sure if I was telling him or myself or the white tablecloth. "Relax," my father said, chuckling again, like this was a show and he knew the next line. "You're making a scene." I pressed the phone to my ear. "Hi, I'm trying to approve a transaction." I gave numbers, spelled my name, answered security questions, gave the last 4 of my social. I kept my voice even. I kept my shoulders square. My heart raced hard enough that I felt it in my ears. "Approved," the agent said. "You can try again." "Thank you," I said. I ended the call. The waiter tried. The machine beeped once, then flashed the same message. Declined. My father's chair scraped as he turned to the table. "This is why," he announced, "Madison handles the big payments." The table laughed again. "Not all of them. Enough." I tucked the useless cards back into my wallet. The zipper snagged. I took a breath that didn't go anywhere. "I'll split it," I said. "If we split it." "Split it," my mother repeated, eyebrows high. "It's my birthday." My father lifted his glass. "Don't be petty, Bella." The waiter stood very still. I could feel his hope that someone, anyone, would step in. No one did. Madison examined her nails. "I'll get it," I said to him. "Please run it again." He did. Beep. The same message. "God," Madison said, laughing under her breath, "this is painful." My mother leaned toward me, smile tucked into her lipstick. "You could return that jacket," she said. "It looks second-hand." "It's from the hospital," I said. "So, yes," she said, and sat back. The room pressed close. The music didn't help. The candles didn't help. I could feel the backs of my knees damp against the chair. The waiter cleared his throat. "We can separate the check," he offered, brave in a small way. "No," my father said, still smiling. "Family sticks together." I reached for the black folder and pulled the bill out. The paper rattled. I slid out the cash I had. It looked thin on the linen. I set it down anyway. "This is what I've got," I said. "We're not counting singles," Madison said, and laughed again, a little burst of air that stung. A cluster of servers moved in with the cake and the sparkler. "Happy birthday to you." They stopped when they saw the table. The sparkler hissed. My mother waved them in anyway and leaned toward the flame. She closed her eyes to make a wish. I stood. The chair legs scraped. "I'll step outside," I said to the waiter. "I'll call again." "Sit," my father said, voice firm. "You're making everyone uncomfortable." "I'll fix it," I said. He sighed. "Always dramatic." I walked past the servers with the singing cake. "Excuse me," I said. I stepped into the hallway by the restrooms where the lights were dimmer and the noise dulled. My hands shook as I called the bank again. I gave the numbers again. The agent said the same words again. "Approved. Try now." I went back to the table. The machine blinked, waiting. "Ready, Bella?" my father asked, cheerful. "Third time's the charm." The waiter ran it. The screen stayed blank for a long second, then flashed red. He held it so only I could see. I nodded because it was the only thing left to do. My mother clapped for the cake. Madison posed with her fork like it was a prop. My father told a story about a famous person who complimented his taste in wine. The waiter cleared the empty plates. He slid the leather folder back onto the table, closer to my father than to me. He didn't say a word. He didn't need to. "I'll cover it," my father announced with a theatrical sigh, like he was saving the day. "Just this once." He winked at the table, and they laughed with relief, like the scene had finally ended. I picked up my jacket. I pushed my chair in. "Thank you," I said to the waiter, meant only for him. Madison tilted her head. "Leaving so soon?" "We haven't done photos." "I have an early shift," I said. She pouted for the camera, then lowered her voice. "Next time, try not to make it weird." I nodded. My mouth tasted like copper. I walked toward the door. A busboy stepped aside with a tray. "Sorry," he said. He looked sorry. That almost undid me. At the entrance, the host smiled the careful smile people use when they see something they don't want to comment on. I pushed through the heavy door and stood on the sidewalk. Beverly Hills buzzed. Valets jogging, engines purring, heels clicking across stone. Warm air hit my face. I swallowed hard and pulled my jacket on. Behind the glass, the sparkler flared, then died. Their mouths moved around a song I couldn't hear. I tucked my hands into my pockets so no one would see them shake. A ride share slid to the curb. I opened the door and got in without looking back. The driver asked for my address. I gave it. My voice sounded normal again. He pulled into traffic. The restaurant lights slid away behind us, clean and bright, like nothing bad ever happened under them. I watched the streetlights sweep the windshield and kept my eyes forward. The night wasn't done with me. I got home after the dinner and didn't take off my scrub top. I dropped my keys, sat on the edge of the bed, and stared at the blinking red light on my phone. One notification. Transaction declined. The room felt too quiet. The fridge hummed. The wall clock clicked like it was counting me down. My fingers still shook from the card machine. The phone buzzed again. Unknown number. I almost let it ring out. I answered on the last vibration. "Isabella, it's Arthur." I didn't say anything at first. I checked the number, checked the ceiling, checked if my voice would come out. "I saw what happened tonight," he said. His voice was low, a little rough, like talking hurt. "I think you have the wrong— You don't deserve that." The words landed clean. I swallowed. "It's fine," I said. "I'm used to it." "That's not something to get used to." I breathed in. The air felt thick. I set the phone on speaker and rubbed my palms on my scrub pants. "Are you eating?" he asked. "Sleeping at all?" "I'm okay." That isn't what I asked. I could hear him breathe, slow in, slow out. I turned off the lamp. The dark made it easier. "I get by," I said. "Is there someone with you?" "Anyone you can call?" "I have early shifts. It's fine." "Work can't talk back, Bella." I almost laughed. It slipped out like a hiccup. "You sound like you've said that before." "I've had a lot of years to practice," he said, and I heard a small cough. "I see you at St. Mary's sometimes." "You do?" "Cardiology clinic, Tuesdays. You push the medical cart. You always say, 'Good morning,' like the day hasn't touched you yet." My hand went straight to my hair, like he could see it. "I didn't know you noticed." "I noticed," he said. "You take time with people. You let them finish their sentences. It's rare." My eyes stung. I pressed my knuckles to them and breathed through it. "I didn't know you were there," I said. "Maybe I wasn't meant to be seen," he said gently, "but I see enough." Silence hung for a moment, but it didn't feel empty. I listened to the sound on his end, the faint clink of a glass, the catch in his breathing. "Old age is loud," he said. "Everything creaks. Everything wakes you up at 3 a.m. Sometimes I call the operator just to hear a voice." "That sounds lonely." "It is," he said. "You understand that more than anyone at that table." "I do." "Come see me this weekend," he said. "Let's talk face to face." "The family won't like it." "Then let's not tell them." I let that sit. I looked around my single room, the pile of laundry in the corner, the folded blanket on the chair, the birthday card I'd written and never sent. My ribs felt tight. "Saturday?" I said. "Saturday," he said. 11. We'll have tea, or whatever you drink." "Tea is good." "Good girl." He coughed once, twice. I heard someone in the background say, "Mr. Montgomery?" And then the sound faded. "You okay?" I asked. "Fine," he said, and I believed him the way you believe an old tree is fine in high wind. He adjusted something near the phone. "Bella?" "Yes?" "Don't let them decide who you are at a dinner table." "I'll try." "Not try," he said. "Decide." I nodded even though he couldn't see it. "Okay." We stayed on the line for another minute without words. I didn't rush to fill it. He didn't either. It felt like we both needed the quiet. "Sleep," he said finally. "I'll see you Saturday." "Good night, Bella." "Good night." The call ended. The room stayed dark. I exhaled and heard my breath shake. It started small. Then my shoulders trembled and I pressed my hand over my mouth. Tears came fast, not loud, just steady. I wasn't crying about the bill anymore. I was crying because someone had spoken to me like I mattered and then stayed on the phone as if I wasn't a burden. When it passed, I turned on the lamp. I picked up the birthday card for my mother, gold script on a pink cover. I set it on the shelf by the door. I looked at it a long time and then slid it into the drawer. Closing that felt like closing a door in my chest. I let the drawer click. I washed my face at the tiny sink and watched the water run clear. I changed into an old t-shirt. I wiped the counter with a dish towel until it stopped smelling like takeout. I made tea and held the mug to warm my hands. Simple things, done slowly. My heart stopped racing. A text tone pinged. Unknown number. Don't let them dim your light, Bella. They only fear what shines. I read it out loud. They only fear what shines. The words didn't puff me up. They grounded me. I put the phone face down and leaned back in the chair. I didn't sleep long that night, but the hours I got felt deep. I woke before the alarm and made eggs, one slice of toast. I packed a lunch. I didn't check my bank app. I didn't need another red message to start the day. Work felt different in small ways. I smiled without forcing it. I lingered when Mr. Alvarez told me about his granddaughter. I loosened the IV tape for a woman who hated needles and kept talking while her hand shook. "You're doing great," I said. "Almost there." I believed it for her, and a little for me. Lucy caught me in the break room. "You good?" she asked, searching my face. "I slept," I said. "That's new," she said, and we both laughed. On my lunch break, I sat in the courtyard and let the sun hit my neck. My phone buzzed. A message from an unknown number again. Saturday at 11. Gate code 2179. Don't knock. Just come through the garden. I typed, "I'll be there," and paused, then added, "Thank you." 3 dots appeared, disappeared, appeared again. "Looking forward," he wrote. The rest of the week went by in shifts and bus rides. I passed the same billboard of Madison's campaign on Sunset and didn't look away, and I didn't flinch either. I walked past a boutique downtown with a dress like the ones from the dinner and didn't go in. Little choices. Each one felt like a step on dry ground. Friday night, I packed a small tote, clean sweater, notebook, a pen that writes smooth, the kind you don't have to shake. I rolled up a tin of Earl Grey I like because it smells like mornings. I added a paper bag of warm cookies from the cafe near the hospital. No bow, just the bag. Saturday, I took the early train to Pasadena. The city thinned into quiet streets and trees. The cab dropped me at a gate with an old brass plate. Montgomery. I typed the code with my thumb. 2-1-7-9. The latch clicked. I pushed through and stepped into a garden that looked like a book I'd never gotten to read. Lemon trees, a long path of square stones, clay pots lined in a row. A gardener glanced up and touched his hat. "Morning," he said. "Morning," I answered. My voice sounded clear. The back door stood open like someone had been waiting. A woman in a neat dress met me in the hall. "You must be Isabella," she said. "I'm Ruth." "Hi." "He's on the sun porch," she said, smiling. "He's been ready since 8. I followed her past framed photos, planes, handshakes, a younger Arthur with his arm around a pilot in a jumpsuit. We passed a piano with its lid up. Someone had left the bench pulled out a little, like they'd be back. Ruth stopped at a glass door. "He's right through here." I tightened my grip on the cookie bag. I stepped in. He sat in a chair by the window, a blanket over his knees, a small oxygen tube at his nose. Sunlight fell across his hands. He looked up and smiled like he'd been expecting my face and not just a visitor. "Bella," he said, "you made it." "I brought cookies," I said, because I didn't know what else to do with my hands. "Those will taste better than the hospital crackers," he said. "Come sit." I sat in the chair beside him. The room smelled like lemons and old paper. A small table held a teapot and 2 cups. He nodded toward them. "Pour?" he asked. I poured. My hand was steady. He watched me the way people watch something they want to remember accurately. We sipped, quiet at first. "How was your week?" he asked. "Full," I said. "Better." "Good." He took a cookie and broke it in half. "Thank you," he said, like I'd done something brave. He ate a small bite and set the rest down. "I don't know what to say about the other night," he said. "I'm sorry you stood there alone." "I wasn't alone," I said. The The waiter looked at me like I was a person. He smiled. Sometimes the ones paid to serve are the only ones who know how. I think so. He shifted and the blanket rustled. You remind me of someone, he said. Someone who worked with her hands and didn't complain. I complain, I said, a half smile. Not out loud, he said. That's the difference. We talked about small things then. The lemon trees, the neighbor's cat that sleeps on the wall, the old plane in one of his photos. He told me a story about a pilot who cried after his first solo flight and tried to hide it behind his hand. Men cry, he said. They just don't like witnesses. I laughed. It came easy. He coughed and reached for water. I handed it to him before he asked. He nodded thanks. Bella, he said, when the cough settled. I can't take back what they did to you at that table. But I can do something else. You already did, I said. You called. I'm not done. He looked at me, steady and clear. There was no speech in his eyes, no performance, just a decision. Come back tomorrow, he said softly. There's something I want you to have. Tomorrow? Tomorrow, he said. 11 again. I glanced at the garden, at the light moving across the tile. My chest tightened, but it wasn't fear alone. It was something new pressed against it. I'll be here, I said. Good, he said, and leaned back. Let's finish the tea. Tell me about your favorite patient this week. So I did. I told him about Mr. Alvarez and the granddaughter photo. I told him about the woman who hated needles and squeezed my wrist like it would pull her through. He listened like these people were famous and he'd been waiting to meet them. When I stood to leave, he squeezed my hand. His palm was warm. Rest tonight, he said. You'll need it. For tea? For what comes with it. I stepped out into the garden. The lemon trees stirred in a soft wind. Ruth walked me to the gate. He likes you, she said. He doesn't like many. I like him, I said. Good, she said, and opened the gate. I walked back to the street with the tote on my shoulder and the empty cookie bag folded flat. The sun sat high but felt gentle. A car passed slow, radio low. I flagged a ride and slid into the back seat. Where to? The driver asked. Union Station, I said. He pulled away from the curb. The house shrank in the mirror. I watched it until the turn hit it. That weekend I went to see him, and what he gave me changed everything I thought I knew about love, family, and loyalty. I reached the gate in Pasadena right at 11. The iron felt cool when I pushed it open. Lemon trees lined the path and brushed my sleeves as I walked. Through the glass I saw him waiting, blanket over his knees, hands folded, calm and ready. Tea? He asked when I stepped into the sunroom. Yes, please. My voice sounded smaller than I'd planned. He nodded to the set on the tray. I poured. The spoon touched the cup with a light tap. No rush, no raised voices. The chair creaked when I sat. I kept my back straight so he wouldn't see my hands shake. You look tired, he said gently. I'm okay. I wrapped both hands around the cup to keep them still. His eyes moved to the table between us. He slid a thick envelope toward me. For you. My fingers were cold when I touched it. The paper rasped under my thumb. I looked at him. He held my gaze, steady and warm. It's all right, he said. I opened the envelope and drew out a set of papers. The first page stared up at me. Bold header, formal lines, and there, my name. Isabella Tran. I didn't breathe for a second. I found air and let it out slow so it wouldn't shake. What is this? My mouth felt dry. I reached for the cup but didn't lift it. A copy, he said. My will. I flipped a page. The words were simple and direct, no fluff. I read my name again to make sure I wasn't reading what I wanted to see. It was clear and plain. My name sat where names don't sit unless someone means it. He spoke while I looked. I'm not a poet, he said. I prefer numbers and signatures. They don't lie as easily." I looked up. He rested one hand on the blanket and one on the arm of the chair. His knuckles were pale, but his voice didn't waver. "Arthur," I said, and stopped there. "Let me be very clear," he said, slow and careful. "Everything that is mine, my share, my holdings, the accounts I control, $900 million, moves to you." The cup in my hand rattled against the saucer. I set it down so I wouldn't spill it. Something in my chest stalled. I tried to speak and nothing came. He waited. He didn't fill the space. He didn't rush me over the number. I blinked hard and swallowed once so my voice would work. "That can't be. That can't be right." "It is." I swallowed again. "That's not small." "No," he agreed, "it is not." I kept my eyes on the papers because looking at him felt like standing too close to heat. My name stayed on the page. It didn't fade. I touched the ink with the tip of my finger like that could prove something. "Why?" I asked, finally finding the only word that made sense. He didn't laugh. He didn't sigh. "You asked me that on the phone with your silence," he said. "I'll answer now." He leaned back a little and lifted his chin. "I have watched you for a long time, Bella. Not to test you, to see you. The hospital hallways, the early buses, the way you say good morning like it matters whether the room hears it or not." I felt my face warm. "You noticed that?" "I noticed the small things," he said. "The way you steady a hand before a needle. The way you crouched to tie an old man's shoe in the lobby so he wouldn't trip. You listened when it was quicker not to. You didn't look over a shoulder when someone needed your eyes." He paused, letting the words sit. "Kindness is expensive," he said softly. "You've been paying with your life." I blinked and the room doubled for a second. I pressed my fingertips to my brow and found my voice again. "You don't have to do this for me." "I'm not doing this for you," he said evenly. "I'm doing it because it is right." He set his hand on the table and tapped the envelope once with a finger. "This isn't a prize. It's balance." A breath rose in my chest and broke. "I'm not charity," I said, my voice cracking open. "I'm family when it hurts." My throat burned as soon as I said it. I turned my face away and breathed through my nose until the heat behind my eyes settled into something I could manage. I wiped under one eye with the heel of my hand and faced him again. He nodded once, pleased but not surprised. "Yes," he said. "That is exactly why." He let the quiet return for a moment. The sun moved across the tile. A lemon leaf brushed the glass and made a soft scrape. "This is not for revenge," he said, "and it is not for display. You hear me?" "I hear you." "You don't need to prove anything." "You don't need to buy approval. You will not hold this over anyone's head. Use it to build, not to burn." "I can do that." "I know." He reached into a leather folio and pulled out a shorter packet, 4 pages, clipped. He placed it beside the will. "These are practical things. A list of accounts you'll need to know exist, not access, knowledge. And a few letters I wrote you over the past year when talking felt harder. Copies, not originals." He tapped them. "Read them slowly." "There's no timer." I let out a breath I didn't know I'd held. "Okay." "Also," he said, and his tone sharpened very slightly, "no one else sees any of this until I say so." I nodded. No messages, no hints, no heavy sighs at dinner. A quick smile flickered at the edge of my mouth. Understood. He watched me tuck the documents back into the envelope. I lined the edges so the pages sat square. My hands were steady now. The tremor had left. "Say it aloud," he added. "I won't tell anyone," I said. "No calls. No texts." "Good." He eased against the cushion. "He was sweet," I said, smiling without meaning to. "He always wore a hat." "He did," Arthur said, "and you made him feel like a man in a hat, not a patient with a chart." We let the tea carry us a little. No hurry. I felt the rush from the number soften into something steadier, like a heart that finds a rhythm after a shock. He touched the envelope again and his fingers brushed mine. "From now on, you choose who you are," he said. "No dinner table decides it." "I hear you," I said. I sat straighter. "I do." "Good." He lifted his hand from the papers and rested it on my knuckles for a second. Just weight, just contact. I kept still. He withdrew and folded his hands on the blanket. "You asked me why," he said, "but not for how long." I didn't want to be rude. "You wouldn't be," he said. "Ask." "How long have you planned this?" "Long enough to be sure," he said. 10 years to watch, 1 year to write, 1 week to choose the words that fit. He allowed himself a thin, satisfied breath. "I trust what I've seen." I studied his face. There was no show in it, no attempt to win me over. Just a man who had decided and then lived with the decision long enough to be calm. "Why me?" I asked again, not because I hadn't heard him, but because the shape of the question asked to be said once more. He didn't change his tone. "Because you never asked." I let that settle in my chest, not as praise but as fact. I placed both palms on the envelope and pressed down lightly as if to smooth the air inside. "Take it," he said, "and take care of yourself." "Thank you," I said. My voice held. "I will." We finished the tea. He told me a short story about a pilot who cried after his first solo flight and wiped his face with the back of his hand so no one would see. "People think strength is noise," he said. "It isn't." "I know," I said. He nodded like the two of us had just agreed on something important that didn't need extra words. I stood and hugged the envelope to my chest. The weight felt real now, not just paper. Ruth appeared in the hallway with a fresh pot and stopped when she saw I was leaving. "Another time," he told her. Then to me, "Walk out the long way. You'll like the shade." I smiled. "I will." At the door I paused. The lemon smell met me again. I stepped onto the tiles, then turned because there was one more thing in his voice, a thread I hadn't named. "Anything else?" I asked. "Yes," he said, and the softness left his tone. "Next time, come alone." "I will." I crossed the porch, careful on the steps. The path stretched ahead, lit in patches. I held the envelope close so the breeze wouldn't lift the corners. The gardener nodded once as I passed. I nodded back, not trusting my mouth to make more words. At the gate I pressed the latch and felt it give. The street waited, quiet and plain. No cheering, no drama, just the sound of my own shoes on stone. I left with a secret heavier than gold, and a promise I couldn't break. The bells rang slow and heavy, and the white orchids lined the aisle like a soft fence. I sat in the back pew with my hands locked around the black ribbon on my wrist. The church smelled like wax and flowers. Gregory and Claire stood in front with their arms around each other, crying loud enough to echo. Phone flashes popped, then died, then popped again. I kept my head down. My knees pressed the wood. I sucked in a quiet breath and held it until the sting behind my eyes eased. I didn't want a scene, not today. Claire stepped to the lectern and unfolded a paper with shaking hands. "My father taught us to love," she said. Her voice trembled in all the right places. "He gave us everything." Gregory nodded on cue and dabbed his eyes with a silk handkerchief. Someone in the front row sniffed. Madison rested her head on Claire's shoulder. Perfect hair, perfect angle, a soft moan for the room to hear. I stared at the tiled floor and counted the seams between squares. My stomach clenched when the paper in Claire's hand rustled. I bit the inside of my cheek. During the hymn, Madison walked down the side aisle. She leaned close as she passed my pew. "Don't stand near us," she whispered. "You'll ruin the photos." My tongue pressed against my teeth. I swallowed. I slid my eyes to the crucifix, breathed out through my nose, and stayed in my seat. When the song ended, a man in a dark suit stepped forward, Charles Whitman. His shoes clicked, then stopped. He placed a sealed envelope on the lectern and laid his palm on it like he was steadying a small ship. "According to his final will and testament," he said, voice calm, "Mr. Arthur Montgomery left instructions to be read here. To all who meant something to him." A ripple ran through the room, coats shifting, a throat clearing, a seat creaking. I felt my spine straighten. The envelope tore with a clean, slow sound. He unfolded the document, scanned it once, then lifted his head. "Be brief," Gregory called up, half laughing. "It's a funeral." Charles did not look at him. "All assets," he read, crisp and even, "to Isabella Tran." The church froze. Even the candles seemed to stop moving. My breath hitched halfway up. I didn't blink. I couldn't. My hands tightened on the ribbon until my knuckles ached. Claire's voice cracked. I stood, not fast, not slow. My legs felt like they belonged to the floor. "He chose fairness," I said. My voice was small, but it didn't shake. A woman in the second row put a hand over her mouth. An older man frowned at the floor as if it had done something wrong. The side door opened, and a staff woman in a black dress slipped in. She moved down the wall and paused beside my pew. Her eyes flicked to mine. She pressed a small envelope into my palm without a word and walked away. I slid it under my ribbon with my thumb. The paper was thin and warm from her hand. I eased the flap open just enough to see a strip of faded receipts. Dates I recognized. Donations made in my name. Small amounts. Many of them. My throat pulled tight. Madison lunged down the aisle toward me and yanked the envelope. "What is that?" Her nails scraped my skin. Charles stepped off the altar and reached us in 3 long strides. He took the envelope cleanly from Madison's grip and returned it to me. "Personal documents," he said. "Return it." "Forgery," Madison hissed. "She bought him." I took one small step back and set my shoulders. I never asked for this. Charles gave a slight nod, barely there. A bell pealed overhead and dragged the air down with it. The room hushed on reflex. For a moment, we all stood inside that sound. Then the side doors opened and 2 photographers edged in, invited by no one and yet invited by everyone. Their lenses clicked. Gregory raised a hand to block his face, then dropped it and smiled in a hurry, like he'd practiced another expression. Claire dabbed her cheekbones again, eyes shining perfectly. Madison turned toward them, anger sharpened into a look that worked on camera. I faced the lectern. "He trusted me," I said, steadying each word. "I will honor that." A hand touched my shoulder lightly. I turned. A man with gray hair nodded at me once, soft and quick, and then looked away. Gregory stalked to Charles and planted his hands on the edge of the lectern. "We want the original. Right now." "It's secured," Charles replied. "Procedures will be followed." Madison spun to the room, arms open in appeal. "The truth will come out," she said. "Justice will be done." The priest cleared his throat for calm. He didn't get it. I walked up the center aisle toward the casket. Every step sounded loud, then quiet, then loud again. I stopped at the edge and rested a single white orchid on the polished wood. My fingers lingered on the petals. "Thank you," I whispered, "for seeing me." My shoulders shook once. I pressed my lips together and breathed until they stopped. Behind me, Claire's heels snapped on stone. She came close enough that I felt the edge of her grief on my back. "We will fight this," she said, voice low and wet. I turned to face her. The skin around her eyes was flushed. The mascara held. "I understand," I said. Gregory joined her, chin high, jaw tight. "See you in court." The cameras fired like tiny storms. Flashes carved the space into white slices. A bouquet snapped in its vase somewhere and toppled onto the carpet with a dull thud. No one picked it up. Charles moved between us, not blocking, just present. "We'll respect his will," he said, simple as closing a door. Claire looked past him, over my shoulder, at the casket, and clenched the program until it bent. "You don't belong here." "I was invited," I said. "By a signature," Gregory shot back. "By a man who knew me," I said. I kept my hands open at my sides so I wouldn't clench them. The photographers drifted closer until one's shoulder brushed mine. "Ma'am, look this way," he asked. Charles turned to him with a flat stare, the camera lowered. The priest stepped in, palms raised, voice even. "Let us pray." He started a blessing. The words rolled over us, soft and steady. Not many listened. I took a small breath and stepped back from the casket. I slipped the envelope with the receipts deeper under the ribbon on my wrist. The paper scratched my skin. It felt like a proof I didn't need to show yet. Madison moved to block my path. "You don't get to stand in front," she said. "Not today." "I already stood," I said. "I'm moving." She laughed through her nose. "Enjoy it while it lasts." "I'm not here to enjoy anything." "Then why are you smiling?" "I'm not." She leaned in so close I felt her perfume. "You'll regret this." "I didn't do this," I said. "He did." She blinked, surprised by the plain truth of it, then flinched like it stung. She stepped aside. I walked past her and returned to the back pew. The hymn resumed. Voices rose and wobbled. I didn't sing. I watched the doorway and counted 5 breaths, then 5 more. When the hymn ended, the priest spoke about mercy. I kept my eyes on the folded program in my lap and smoothed the crease with my thumb until it lay flat. At the end of the service, the pallbearers lifted the casket. People stood, chairs scraped. Perfume, cologne, the damp smell of flowers pushed together. Gregory offered his arm to Claire and turned his head so the photographers would catch the profile he liked. Madison wiped a tear that wasn't falling and tilted her. I stayed under the shade of the arch and adjusted the ribbon on my wrist. The thin paper under it pressed against my pulse. Claire turned, eyes bright and angry. "This isn't over," she said. "I know." Gregory stepped closer, close enough that I could see the diamond of sweat at his temple. "We will tear this apart," he said. "You can try," I answered. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't lower it either. Madison crossed her arms and tilted her head the way she does when she poses. "Smile for the papers," she said. "Your 15 minutes." "Go grieve," I said. "Let me grieve too." "No," Claire said. "You don't get our grief." "I'm not asking for yours." The priest's voice drifted out from inside the church. Someone started the organ again. A car door slammed on the street. Gregory adjusted his cufflinks and leaned in, breath tight and sweet. "See you in court." "Respect his will," Charles said behind us, calm and final, as if he were putting a book back on the shelf. I turned toward the steps. The air felt hot on my face. My hand tightened on the ribbon until the edge bit the skin. I walked down without looking at the cameras or the fence or the pointing fingers. They swore to drag me to court, and I didn't flinch. The microphones waited for me at the bottom of the courthouse steps. Lights popped. I breathed in once, slow, and tightened my grip on the handle of my document bag. Charles stood shoulder to shoulder with me. "Walk straight," he said under his breath. "Eyes forward." "I've got it." We climbed the stairs through a tunnel of cameras. Someone shouted my name. I kept moving. The marble doors were heavy and sweet with old polish. Inside, the air cooled. My palms stayed damp. "All rise," the clerk called. Everyone stood. The judge took her seat, glasses low on her nose. I sat when the room did and laced my fingers together on my lap so they wouldn't shake. Across the aisle, Gregory stared at me like I'd stolen his house keys. Claire pressed a wadded tissue to her mouth. Madison looked perfect and angry, like a billboard with fists. "Counsel," the judge said. "Opening remarks." The other side went first. Their attorney, slick hair, polished smile, stepped to the lectern like he owned the floor. "Your Honor," he began, "this is a tragic case of exploitation." A young woman wormed her way into an elderly man's life. My stomach tightened. Isolated him, and positioned herself to seize his wealth at the most vulnerable moment. He clicked a remote. Screens lit up with photos. A freeze frame of the birthday dinner, me in that cheap dress, eyes down, card reader on the table. A shot of me outside the ER, head bowed, shoulders slumped. Captions pulled from strangers online. Greedy, gold digger, not family. Whispers stirred. I gripped the edge of my chair until my knuckles whitened. She is not blood, he finished, turning to the judge. She is not kin. She is an opportunist. Gregory nodded hard. He was led, he said, not waiting for permission. Mr. Reed, the judge warned. He sat back, jaw tight. Defense, the judge said. Charles rose without a glance at the screens. He didn't touch the remote. He didn't touch anything. Facts don't need theatrics, Your Honor, he said. We will show two things. 1. Mr. Montgomery knew exactly what he was doing. 2. He acted from long-standing conviction, not pressure. He handed a binder to the clerk. Defense Exhibit A through H. The clerk distributed copies. The rustle of paper filled the room. Exhibit A, Charles said. A timeline of Ms. Tran's employment at St. Mary's. Shifts, supervisor notes, commendations. My name appeared in clean lines. Dates, departments, hours. No adjectives, just numbers. Exhibit B, patient letters. The screen showed scanned notes. Thank you for sitting with my mother. Thank you for staying 10 extra minutes. Thank you for tying my father's shoe. The room quieted. Even the photographer in the aisle lowered his camera. Exhibit C, Charles continued. Video from the day of the will. The screen changed. There was Arthur at his table, pen steady, eyes clear. 2 witnesses signed after him. A notary stamped the page. Mr. Montgomery, a voice in the video asked, is this your decision? Yes, he said, clear enough to cut glass. No one persuaded me. Exhibit D, Charles said. A sworn statement from Mr. Montgomery's primary physician. Patient is of sound mind and capable of financial decisions. The other attorney shifted. He didn't look at the screen. Exhibit E, Charles said. Handwritten letters from Mr. Montgomery to Ms. Tran over the past year. He read 2 lines. Use it to build, not to burn. Do not trade decency for applause. The judge's pen moved. I exhaled, quiet. Plaintiffs call Ms. Victoria Reed, the other attorney snapped, breaking the rhythm. Madison took the stamp, hand on the Bible, chin set. She swore in, slid into the chair, and folded her hands like a statue. You spent significant time caring for your grandfather? He asked. Yes. Daily? Most days. Charles stood. Permission to cross, Your Honor? Proceed. Ms. Reed, Charles said, how many days were you at Mr. Montgomery's residence in the month before his will was signed? Many. How many? I don't recall. Would your calendar help? He held up printed screenshots. Your posts show Palm Springs, Napa, and Milan over those 4 weeks. 14 days away, yes? Her jaw tightened. Work trips. Of course, Charles said softly. In the 2 weeks prior to the will, how many doctor visits did you attend with Mr. Montgomery? She hesitated. 1. Records show none, he said without heat. No further questions. He turned. Ms. Claire Reed, please. Claire swore in, delicate and teary. You manage certain household accounts? Charles asked. With my husband. This is a ledger for the Family Support Fund. He slid it to the bailiff. Can you explain these entries to a private consultancy labeled Image Management in the week of Mr. Montgomery's memorial, totaling $82,000? We were grieving. The other attorney rose. Objection! Foundation! Overruled, the judge said after a beat. Continue. Charles glanced at me. A small nod. I stood. My legs felt light and hollow, like they'd been emptied out and refilled with air. Ms. Tran, Charles said, did you ever ask Mr. Montgomery for money? No. Did you accept gifts from him prior to his will? No. Why do you think he chose you? My mouth went dry. I swallowed. I never asked for a cent, I said. He chose me because I never asked. Madison shot up from her seat. She's lying! Order, the judge snapped. Madison sat, breath sharp. Charles lifted one more folder. Exhibit H, he said. Receipts discovered at the memorial service. Years of small donations made in Ms. Tran's name to shelters and children's clinics. Mr. Montgomery kept these. He filed them under Isabella. The screen showed my name typed on lines next to $20, $40, $100, over and over. My throat tightened. I held still. He clicked again. A silent clip played from St. Mary's lobby. An old man standing on one foot trying to bend down. I entered the frame and crouched to tie his shoe. In the corner, Arthur passed behind a potted plant, pausing, watching. He was small in the frame, but he was there. The room went quiet enough to hear the HVAC hum. "No further witnesses, Your Honor," Charles said. "Defense rests." The judge leaned back, flipped through notes, and changed her glasses. The seconds fell heavy. I pressed my knees together and stared at the wood grain on the rail in front of me. "Counsel for plaintiffs," the judge said. The other attorney smoothed his tie. "Your Honor, motive is simple," he said. "Money. She inserted herself into a family to take what isn't hers." Charles stood for the last time. "Your Honor," he said, "motive is also simple. Mr. Montgomery wanted fairness. He prepared, documented, and declared his choice. He asked Ms. Tran to build, not to burn. The law respects such choices." He sat. The judge took off her glasses, folded them, and looked over the room. "This court finds the will valid," she said. The hallway was a wall of microphones. "Isabella, thoughts on the verdict? Did you manipulate Mr. Montgomery? Are you family or a fraud?" I stopped long enough to meet one camera dead on. "Respect his will," I said, nothing more. A voice behind me cut through the noise. "This isn't over." Gregory. His words rolled down the stone corridor. Charles leaned in, voice low. "Keep moving." We pushed through the heavy doors into the heat. Sun came down hard on the steps. I blinked. The crowd pressed, then shifted, then parted just enough for a path. "They'll try something else," Charles said, barely audible. I tightened my hand on the bag strap until the leather bit my palm. I fixed my eyes on the bottom step. One step, then the next. I didn't look back. They lost today, but the war in them wasn't done. I tried to start the day like nothing had changed. I boiled water, dropped a tea bag in a mug, opened the window to let in the sound of traffic. My phone buzzed. My phone buzzed, then buzzed again, then didn't stop. Unknown numbers, tags, DMs from people I didn't know. I turned the ringer off and told myself, go to work, be normal. I checked the time, tied my hair back, and reached for my badge. The phone lit up anyway with a headline that punched me in the chest. "Adopted nurse scams billionaire." They used a picture of me leaving the courtroom, mouth half open, eyes half closed. They wrote that I cut an old man off so I could take his money. They said I bled my adoptive family. The comments were fast and mean. A meme showed my face on a dollar bill. My hand went cold on the countertop. I picked up my bag, locked the door, and walked to the bus stop because my brain didn't know what else to do. At St. Mary's, I caught the door before it closed on a tech with a coffee carrier. He didn't meet my eyes. In the staff hallway, 2 nurses quieted when I passed. I heard my name, and then the sound of paper tearing. "HR needs you," the charge nurse said from the doorway. "Now." The HR office smelled like printer ink. The supervisor had my file open. She kept her voice careful. "Administrative leave," she said. "It's temporary." "For how long?" "Until this clears." "My patients," I said, and the words snagged. "I have 3 oncology rounds." "We've reassigned." She slid a plain envelope across the table. I stared at it. My badge stopped working at the clock-in station. A security guard watched me empty my locker. I put my stethoscope and a pair of scrubs in a cardboard box and pressed my lips together so I wouldn't bite them. I slipped out the back. The alley was loud with dumpsters and deliveries. When I turned the corner, microphones were waiting. "Isabella! Did you steal family money?" "No comment. Please move." My voice was thin. I lifted a hand to block a lens and stumbled into the first taxi that stopped. The driver looked at me in the mirror and didn't ask questions. I watched the hospital shrink and then disappear. Back home, my group chat was quiet. No jokes, no gifts, just the last message from days ago about someone's cat. A friend texted me privately, "I'm going to untag for a bit, okay?" I typed, "Sure," and didn't hit send. I closed the curtains and turned off the Wi-Fi. I lay on the couch and held a pillow tight against my ribs. My name flashed on a TV crawl in the apartment next door. I could hear it through the wall. By afternoon, the stories multiplied. One site said I used patients for clout. Another said I had a secret deal with my lawyer. A thread accused me of blackmail. Screenshots of fake emails with my name. A photo of a woman in a nightclub dress that wasn't me, but they said it was. My heart thumped too hard for sitting still. I poured water and my hand shook so much I spilled it and had to wipe the counter with a towel I hadn't washed in a week. I kept moving because stopping felt like drowning. I cleaned the sink. I folded a shirt that didn't need folding. I checked my phone even though I'd turned it off. Night came fast. A notification cut through the silent mode anyway. My banking app. "Your account has been temporarily restricted due to a fraud report." My knees went out. I slid to the floor and hit the cabinet with my shoulder. Tears broke the way glass breaks. I covered my mouth with both hands and tried to breathe in and out, but it kept catching. I tapped my sternum with my fist, light taps, counting 3 and 3 and 3 until the air settled. Someone noticed, twice. Small knocks, not a fist. I froze. Another knock, just as small. I got up, wiped my face with my sleeve, and looked through the peephole. No one. Only the hallway light. When I opened the door, a brown envelope lay on the mat. No name. Thick, with something hard inside. I locked the door and carried it to the table. The flap lifted with a dry sound. Inside were copies of accounting sheets, columns, dates, transfers. Highlighter dragged across lines labeled PR Memorial, Image Management, Reputation Support. Some amounts circled. A USB drive in a small plastic bag. A note on torn paper. Look closer at PR payments. I stood there with the papers in my hands, and the room suddenly felt solid again. I called Charles. He held up the USB in the bag. "We need to view this." "Use my old laptop," I said. "It's not connected." He booted it and slid the drive in with the plastic still around it. The file list was short. One video, time-stamped late night. The playback opened on a garage. Madison stepped into frame in a hoodie, hair tied up. She fed piles of paper into a metal bin and lit a match. The flame caught. She looked over her shoulder, then tossed a second stack in and watched until it went fully black. Charles didn't look at me. He watched the timestamp. "We need metadata," he said. "Device, codec, GPS if any." He copied the file and ran a tool I didn't know the name of. It spit out lines I couldn't read. He took a photo of my clock next to the USB on the laptop edge, like he was planting a flag. Then he called someone from his contacts and spoke in words that sounded like steps on a map. Chain of custody, preservation letter, immediate hold. "We're not touching the bag again," he said, hanging up, "and we won't email anything. We hand it over." "Tonight?" "First thing. I'll call an investigator I trust." He paused. "Can you handle that?" "Yes," I said. My voice didn't shake. We compared the accounting sheets to the bank statements he'd used in court. The same account number that paid for image management showed up in a separate list he'd flagged for household expenses. The names matched. The dates matched. The arrows drew themselves. He exhaled, long and even. This was coordinated. I put both hands flat on the table and kept them there until they stopped trembling. "What do we do?" "File for preservation," he said. "Protect evidence. Stop any transfers." He started typing an email on his phone, short and precise. "We'll notify the PR firm, the bank, and the memorial vendor to hold logs. I'll draft a motion for a temporary freeze on specific accounts." "Do it." He looked up. "You sure?" "Yes." He made the calls. His tone didn't change, calm, exact. Twice he said, "Acknowledged," and waited for the word before hanging up. The apartment felt smaller with purpose inside it. I found a box for the USB and wrote the date on a strip of tape. My hand steadied as I wrote. The pen didn't scrape. I peeled a bandage and wrapped it around the cut on my thumb from the envelope flap. A small thing, but it helped. Charles checked the metadata again and compared it to a public camera feed near Madison's building. "Angles match," he said, more to himself than to me. He took a photo of the screen, then of the envelope, then of my front door with the clock again. His phone buzzed. He showed me a message from a reporter we both knew from the hallway scrum. We received similar leaks. I read it twice. "Don't respond," Charles said. "Not yet." The next ping was from a local investigative blog, a teaser headline, "Follow the PR money." No details, just the hint and a promise of documents. The comments were full of side eyes and question marks. Someone asked, "Where's the proof?" Someone else wrote, "Show receipts." I felt my shoulders drop a little, like I had set down a bag. Not all of it, just a corner. "It's a start," Charles said. "We let the process do what it's built to do." He packed the copies into a folder and left the originals on my table, each in a fresh plastic sleeve. He wrote the time on each sleeve with a Sharpie and initialed it. He made me initial the log he kept. He moved slowly, and that made me calm. "It's late," he said, glancing at the clock. "Try to sleep." "I'll try. At 8, I'll pick you up for the handoff. I'll be ready." He paused at the door. "You did right. Thank you." After he left, the apartment was quiet enough to hear the fridge kick on. I rinsed my mug and set it upside down to dry. I put the USB box at the back of my closet, behind winter coats I didn't wear. I checked the lock once, then again. I sat by the window with a glass of water and sipped it in small mouthfuls. The bandage on my thumb looked too white in the dark. I pressed it down until it stuck. My breathing evened out. An email pinged on the laptop, automated. "Preliminary review opened," the subject said. I didn't click for details. I just closed my eyes for a second and opened them again. Another message popped up on my phone. "Charles, you did right. Sleep if you can." "Thank you," I typed. "I'll try." I flipped the phone face down and pulled the blanket up to my chin. My heart slowed a notch. My jaw unclenched. Outside, someone laughed. Then a car door slammed. Then the hallway light hummed back on its timer. Near midnight, my screen lit with a news alert. "Authorities reviewing financial irregularities tied to PR payments." I stared at the words until they blurred. Under it, a comment on one of the stories shifted the wind just a bit. Maybe we judged her too fast. I set the phone on the nightstand and turned toward the wall. By morning, the story had a new villain. I lifted the first folder. Exhibit A, payment records labeled PR Memorial and Image Management in the week of my grandfather's funeral. I read the dates and the totals. 52,000, 84,000, same vendor, same week. I held up the printed statements and matched them to invoices. "These copies are for you." Charles moved down the front row with a stack stamped copy. Exhibit B, a time-stamped video. The screen beside me lit up. We blurred the face and left the time code. A figure in a hoodie fed papers into a metal bin and lit them. She turned, looked around, and added more. The room inhaled as one. "This was delivered to us anonymously," I said. "We immediately preserved the file and handed it to investigators. Chain of custody is intact." Pen scratched. A reporter near the wall said, "Arson! Evidence destruction?" Another yelled, "Who is that?" "I won't identify the person in the clip," I said. "That's for law enforcement." I raised another folder. "We also filed preservation letters today. The PR firm, the bank, and vendors have been notified to hold logs and not delete records. No leaks from us, only filings and facts." Charles placed a sheet with a large QR code on an easel. "This links to a public summary with redactions," I said. "You'll find what we showed you and what we filed." A hand shot up before I called on anyone. "You stole the family," a man in a blue blazer said. "How do you answer people who say that?" The court decided the will is valid, I said. Today is about fraud, not feelings. A woman in a red jacket stood without waiting. Did you ask for money before the will? Never. A third voice jumped in. Isn't this a smear against the Reeds? I'm presenting records, I said. You can verify them. I let the silence hold for a beat and then shifted the room. The lies cost me my job, I said. While the stories spread, my patients lost their nurse. My badge is suspended. My accounts were frozen based on anonymous claims. That's the impact of disinformation. Several heads tilted up. A man in the back nodded and wrote, "Hospital leave," on his pad. An investigative reporter raised her hand. We traced the same PR payments, she said. Different sources, same vendor, same date range. Murmurs moved down the row. A national outlet asked, "Will St. Mary's reinstate you if these allegations are confirmed?" A representative from the hospital stood up from the side wall. She kept her words careful. "We're reviewing immediately," she said. "No further comment at this time." I turned back to the cameras. I could feel the room bracing, waiting. I didn't waste it. "My grandfather didn't leave me money," I said. "He left me justice." The pen stopped. Even the camera whir softened. "Respect his will." I opened the next folder. Exhibit C, small receipts. Year after year, I laid them in a row. $20, $40, $100, my name typed on each. Donations to shelters and children's clinics. He saved bees, not me. We include them to complete the picture. Beside them, I placed a photo of a letter in his handwriting. We read one line out loud. "Use it to build, not to burn." No one clapped. That was good. This wasn't a rally. "Two brief statements," Charles said, stepping up. "No advocacy, only facts." Our nurse lead from St. Mary's walked to the mic and gave a small nod. "She stayed late for oncology rounds," she said. "Often." She stepped away. A woman I recognized from a chemo room spoke into the mic for 30 seconds. "She held our hands," she said. "That's all." She went back to her chair with her husband's help. A phone chimed near the aisle, then another. The Reed family's attorney had sent a statement to every reporter at once. A man with horn-rimmed glasses read it out, flat. "The Reeds categorically deny all allegations. We will pursue additional legal action for defamation and seek sanctions for evidence tampering." Charles looked up from his notes. "We welcome scrutiny," he said. "Preserve everything." I didn't add anything. I kept my fingers locked together so I wouldn't reach for the mic again. A social editor pointed to the screen of her laptop. #Spike, she whispered to the person next to her. The investigative reporter from earlier said, half to herself, comment section flipped. I closed my folder and squared the edges. "I want my badge back," I said. "I want to serve patients." "Thank you for giving space to the truth." I stepped away to let Charles announce a confidential tip line for additional documents, then returned to take questions outside. We moved to the sunny hallway. The cameras followed like shadows but gave us a few feet. A reporter walked backward in front of me. "If rehired today, I'll scrub in tomorrow." Another voice. "Will you sue the outlets that ran the false stories?" "I'm focused on facts," I said. "That's all I'll say." On the steps, a middle-aged man put a hand on his chest and said softly, "We're with you." I nodded, throat tight but steady. We took a few more questions under the awning. "How soon can investigators act? Have you heard from the family today? Do you think the video will lead to charges?" Charles handled most of it with measured answers. "Chain of custody is intact," he said. "Agencies are reviewing the materials." He repeated it 3 different ways, then cut the Q&A before the tone could turn into a brawl. Inside again, I wiped the podium with a napkin because my palms had left faint prints. The live stream counter on a phone screen had doubled and then tripled. A producer waved me over and asked for a clean soundbite. I gave her the same line, "Respect his will." She mouthed thanks and ran. Near the back doors, the hospital rep caught my arm. "I meant it," she said. "We're reviewing." "I appreciate it." As the last reporters drifted out, a blogger tried to push one more question. "Bella, one word for Madison?" I didn't bite. Charles stepped between us and tapped his watch. The blogger shrugged and left. The room exhaled. Chairs leaned empty. The water on the table had gone warm. I capped the marker we'd used to label the exhibits and slid it into my pocket without thinking. Charles stacked the remaining copies and packed them into a box. "You kept it tight," he said. "Did it land?" He glanced at the door where a small cluster of reporters still talked, heads together. "It landed." I unscrewed a bottle and took a long drink. The tremor in my hands had gone to a hum in my elbows. Manageable. I rolled my shoulders back and let them drop. A volunteer from the community center came in with a trash bag and a smile that reached her eyes. "You need anything?" she asked. "Just a minute." We moved out to the courtyard so the staff could reset the room. The sun hit the tiled ground in a bright square. A breeze lifted the corner of a poster someone had taped to a column, a hotline number and the words, "If you know something, say something." A teenager held a door open for an elderly couple who'd stayed to thank me. I shook their hands and kept my grip firm. My phone buzzed in my pocket. I let it buzz once more before checking. The subject line read, "Hospital Board, emergency meeting tonight." A second alert slid over it. "DA reviewing PR money evidence for potential charges." I stared at the screen until the text steadied. Charles read over my shoulder and gave one short nod. "Good," he said. "We keep the pace." I slid the phone away and looked back at the hallway where the last camera crew was coiling their cables. Someone laughed softly. Someone else said, "It feels different now." I stood a little taller, then lifted the box of leftover copies and carried it to the car myself. A reporter called my name one. We kept the opening simple. Folding chairs, coffee and paper cups, a stack of clipboards on a plastic table. I stepped to the front and cleared my throat. "Our mission is simple," I said. "Protect adopted kids from abuse, physical, emotional, financial." 3 promises: safety, education, therapy. Emergency cases first, scholarships for recovery. No exceptions. A soft ripple of nods moved through the room. I felt my shoulders loosen one notch. We met in the conference nook right after. "Governance," I said to the new board, "Day 1. No conflicts of interest, documented and audited. Anyone tied to the Reeds is out. Spending ratio, 70% to programs, 30% to operations. Independent audit at the end of the first year." Our COO, a woman who had rebuilt 2 nonprofits from the ground up, tapped the spreadsheet. "We'll post the breakdown monthly." "Post everything," I said. By noon, I had a team. A seasoned NGO director who could wrestle budgets into shape. A child rights attorney who still wore courtroom shoes. A therapy programs lead with sleeves of kid-drawn bracelets. Volunteers formed a line that wrapped around the reception wall. We fingerprinted, ran background checks, and handed out lanyards. Above them, I taped a cardboard sign we made with a black marker. Dignity. Boundaries. Proof. The tech vendor set our online intake live at 2. "Uploads enabled, redaction tool built in," he said, fingers flying. A dashboard came online. Cases submitted, funds disbursed, average response time. We agreed on a 48-hour SLA for first contact and set a bright blue toggle for anonymous tips. By the next morning, the inbox hit 200 submissions. Our case manager held a printout with both hands like it could slip away. "We triage," I said. "High risk first. Move. No one gets lost." We split the stack. One teen needed emergency housing after a guardian threatened to sell her belongings for rent owed. Another had school records withheld until he paid back clothes and lunches. A third was blocked from therapy because a parent wouldn't share insurance info unless the kid earned it with chores. "Approve safe housing," I said. "Arrange transport tonight. Unlock transcripts with counsel. Short-term therapy in place by Monday." I signed the first 3 grants with a blue pen. My hand shook once, then steadied. A foster mom pressed both my hands and cried into a tissue. "We're not alone anymore," she said. I squeezed back. My jaw ached from holding still. We drove to the downtown shelter that afternoon. Fluorescent lights buzzed, paint peeled on the playroom wall. A little boy hugged a chewed-up bear and watched from behind a bookshelf. I dropped to the floor, sorted a crate of books by reading level, and labeled a corner "Quiet." A girl handed me a crooked card that said, "Thank you, Bella." I nodded so I wouldn't spill over. Back at the office, we sat around the cheap conference table with laptops open and sleeves rolled. A program associate asked, careful, "Do we highlight the totals for PR?" I closed my folder with a flat tap. No trophies, only lives. The room went still. Then everyone nodded, once, twice, like they were signing under it. We held a small press update at the end of the week. No fanfare, no backdrop. Just a podium with our name and a projector showing the public dashboard. "This is our first transparency report," I said. "Cases received, funds spent, hotline volume. We protect identities, we don't sell stories." A reporter asked, "Why refuse luxury PR? It could scale donations." "No glam, just work," I said. Another asked, "Your nickname is trending, the kind air. Thoughts?" "It's the kids," I said. "Keep the focus there." Safeguards came next. We drafted a red flag protocol for financial abuse in adoptive homes, unpaid debts, forced labor framed as consequences, guardians using kids' identities to open cards. We signed MOUs with hospitals, schools, and social services. "When you see Arthur Blue on a file," I told partners, "you move it to the front." "Arthur Blue alert urgent," a nurse partner called later that afternoon. 14-year-old, shows up with bruises, says he owes his guardians for food. "On our way," I said. We rerouted a driver and secured a bed at a youth residence by nightfall. The therapist texted me 2 days later. "Nightmares decreased this week." Our first board fight arrived with the second week's pipeline. "One medical case will drain a month of budget," the COO said, "or we can place 5 smaller grants." I looked down the list. "We split the package," I said. 2 life or death now, 3 bridges to buy time. We solve today without borrowing guilt from tomorrow. The vote held. It wasn't clean, but it held. That evening, I carried fresh flowers to my grandfather's grave. No cameras, no speeches. I set a small card against the stone. "I'm building." My fingers lingered on the cold edge. The air had the salt of the San Diego Bay, even this far inland. I let my shoulders fall and stood there long enough for my breath to find its pace. The ripples started to show. A principal sent a note on school letterhead. "We released records immediately. Thank you." A child psychologist wrote in neat blocks, "First full night of sleep reported." Our donation feed blinked in small numbers, $5, $10, $20, steady as a metronome. A volunteer messaged at midnight, "We have room for one more." Not every knock was welcome. A PR agency that had shouted me down during the smear cycle asked for a meeting. "We can position the foundation as premium philanthropy," their rep said. "Thought leader events, jet-set galas, limited capsules with—" "No," I said. "No glam, just work." "We can grow your brand." "We're not a brand. We are a service." I posted a policy that afternoon. No paid interviews, no sponsored content, no event fees for access. We wrote it plain and pinned it to our site. The office found a rhythm. I learned the map of the space by sound, the printer warm-up buzz, the soft whine of the mini-fridge, the squeak in the third floorboard from the door. I signed approvals in batches, took calls in the hallway, and made coffee in a dented silver pot that dripped if you poured too fast. I swapped my long commute for a 1-bedroom near the water, bought a folding chair for the balcony, and started cooking soup at night. At 10, I set my phone face down, except for the emergency inbox. That stayed on. I checked it once before I brushed my teeth, then put it back on the counter like a sleeping infant. "COO here," my phone chirped one morning. "We're at capacity." "Start the wait list," I said. "Prioritize by risk. And if you hit a wall, call me." We added 2 case managers, trained them fast, and pulled a retired social worker from volunteer to paid staff. "I can do 2 days a week," she said. 3 if you feed me." "We have soup," I said. She laughed and then cried and then laughed again. By the 3rd week, the lobby filled before 9. A teenager sat with her backpack on her lap and kept one foot on the strap like an anchor. A toddler stacked wooden blocks beside his foster dad and waited for a yes that would move them out of a motel. A grandmother with a church badge folded a list of medications into a tiny square and handed it to our nurse liaison. We moved with purpose. We matched a child with a trauma-informed therapist before lunch. We sent a rideshare code to a girl who needed to get to a courthouse across the county by 3. We called a principal and asked, "Can you hold that enrollment slot until tomorrow?" He said yes. "Thank you," I said, and I meant it like breath. The local news did a short segment. They showed only hands passing clipboards and kids' shoes stretching to touch a line of tape on the floor. They didn't show faces. "We don't show faces," the producer had said, and I'd nodded so hard my neck hurt. That night, I carried a stack of approval letters to the mailbox myself. The ocean air made the paper edges ripple. I fed each envelope into the slot, one by one, and listened for the small hiss when it left my finger. The cloth in my hand stopped moving. I set it down on the counter and pressed my palms to the edge to keep them from shaking. The fridge hummed, then clicked quiet. "Do you want me to send her away?" the guard asked. I pulled the door open and felt the hallway air on my arms. "No," I said. "I'll come down." I stepped into the elevator and watched the numbers drop, breathing the way the therapists had taught our kids, slow in, slower out. The doors opened to the lobby's low light. Beyond the glass, a figure waited at the gate, a face I knew, carved down by time and effort. I reached for the handle. I opened the door, not to the past, but to a choice. The buzzer went off just as I was finishing the day's reports. "Someone's at the gate," the guard said. "She says her name's Madison." I froze for half a second. Then I stood. "Let her in." By the time I reached the lobby, she was already there, smaller than I remembered, her shoulders caved in, a wrinkled envelope clutched in both hands. Her hair hung flat, her eyes hollow. "Hi," she said. I'm sorry for everything." She didn't try to hug me. She just bowed her head, like she finally understood that silence can be heavier than shouting. "Come inside," I said. I kept one arm's length between us. The staff glanced over but didn't linger. They knew when to leave a room alone. We sat across from each other at the reception table. She set the envelope down carefully, like it might break. "What's in it?" I asked. "Bills, court notices, a job form. I don't know where to start anymore." Her voice cracked once, then she forced it steady. "I burned the papers. I lied to the press." "Say it again," I said. "I lied." The air felt thick. For the first time, she didn't decorate her words. "Why?" She swallowed. "I was scared. Of being nothing, of them leaving me out, of debts, of me." She looked up. "It was all me." I leaned back. "I don't need a tragedy. I need the truth." She nodded slowly. No excuses, just air and guilt. I pointed at the sign on the wall. "Sure, and supervised," I said. We filed her under volunteer probation. An hour later, I found Madison in the corner of the playroom, folding donated clothes into piles. A little girl stood nearby, watching. Madison knelt down, held up a small jacket, and said softly, "Looks warm." The child smiled. That was all, but it was enough. At 9, she clocked out. Her palms were red, her nails cracked at the edges. She was wiping down a shelf when she nicked her hand. I handed her a small bandage. She murmured thanks and pressed it on. We didn't hug. We didn't talk more. Just a nod, quiet, clean. When she finished cleaning, she walked up to the front desk and turned in her sheet. "Signed," she said. "Good," I replied. She hesitated. "Can I see Mom?" "Not here," I said. "Not today. This place stays safe, even from family." She nodded, eyes down, but didn't argue. She stepped outside into the cool evening. The motion lights flickered on above her. Her shoulders were straight, not slouched. I watched until she crossed the gate, then turned off the last light inside. The office was silent except for the hum of the old fridge. I checked the emergency inbox. 3 new alerts. I flagged them for the morning. Then I walked to the small table under my grandfather's photo and placed a single white flower there. "You were right," I whispered, more breath than voice. I opened the front door and stood on the steps. The city was quiet. Cars passed in the distance, their headlights brushing across the foundation sign, "Build, not burn." Justice didn't feel like fire anymore. It felt like order. "They taught me money is power," I said softly. "He taught me mercy is forever." The wind shifted, warm against my cheek. For the first time, it didn't sting. Would you let them start over or keep them out for good? Tell me in the comments. Don't forget to like, share, and follow.